They say they had heard about the case in the media. Stephen Avery's attorney is asking for a hearing on the additional charges filed against his client. Avery was initially charged with killing Teresa Halbach. Charges of sexual assault, kidnapping, and false imprisonment were added when his nephew, Brendan Dassey, confessed to police. Avery's attorney wants a preliminary hearing on these additional charges. While they didn't know him.
Follow-up, Stephen Avery speaks out for the first time about his nephew's role in the Teresa Halbach murder. Avery says police investigators coerced his nephew, Brendan Dassey, into telling them the two raped, murdered, and burned the body of Halbach. He says none of what Dassey said about the young photographer is true. Avery also says his nephew isn't very smart. However, he doesn't have any hard feelings for his nephew because he says Dassey just doesn't know any better. 43-year-old Avery has been jailed since November in the alleged kidnapping, rape, and murder of Teresa Halbach on Halloween. Milwaukee police have
tomorrow. Stephen Avery is back in the news. His lawyer is asking for a preliminary hearing on 3 additional charges against his client. Avery is charged in connection with the murder of Teresa Halbach, along with his nephew, Brendan Dassey. Avery has also been charged of being party to first-degree sexual assault, kidnapping, and false imprisonment. His attorney says those additional charges are unsupported by evidence. And the work goes on in Milwaukee.
Alleged involvement. Our Diane Pathy was live in our newsroom with a preview and reaction from the Halbach family on that story. Diane.
Good morning, Susan. Mike Halbach, Teresa's brother, tells us he knew this Dateline special was being produced, but what he hopes is that it's about his sister and not all about Stephen Avery. Here's a preview.
Does her disappearance have a mysterious link to a terrifying crime 20 years before?
The program will cover Stephen Avery's past, the wrongful conviction that kept him behind bars, the DNA evidence that eventually freed him, and what he's accused of right now. The Halbachs tell us watching Teresa on the news is never easy, but they want audiences to see Teresa and understand how she lived and the family that she left behind.
I'm just hoping to see Teresa on there, who she was, just so the world knows that there was a person, a real person who was affected, and the whole family that was affected.
That's Mike Halbach, Teresa's brother. That Dateline piece will air this Saturday night at 7 right here on today's TMJ4. Live in the newsroom, Diane Pathy, today's TMJ4. Susan, back to you.
Okay, Diane, thank you very much.
A tragic story in Manitowoc County is getting national attention this weekend.
Dateline NBC is looking at the murder of Teresa Halbach and the Stephen Avery connection. Victoria Corderi has the story.
A cool wind swept through the woods and fields of rural northeastern Wisconsin last November as volunteers searched for 25-year-old Teresa Halbach. She had vanished a few days before.
We just want her to come home.
20 years earlier, near the same area, another woman, Penny Burnson, almost died when a stranger attacked her while she was jogging.
He ran out from behind the bush, and I knew immediately what he wanted.
Penny says the man demanded sex, and when she fought back, he began to choke her.
I lost consciousness.
Did you have a clear picture of the assailant's face in your head?
Yes, I selected Stephen Avery's photo.
Stephen Avery was charged with attempted murder, false imprisonment, and sexual assault. He had alibi witnesses who placed him far from the crime scene, but he was convicted and sentenced to 32 years in prison, largely on the strength of Penny's identification and unwavering testimony. Still, Avery never admitted guilt, and years later, the Wisconsin Innocence Project took up his case.
I said to my pastor, what if I've made a horrible mistake?
DNA would provide the answer. In this case, and also in the search for Teresa Halbach, was there a connection between them? Victoria Corderi, Dateline NBC.
And you can see Dateline Suspicion tomorrow night at 7 right here on today's TMJ4. And now
to the murder of Teresa Halbach. Now it makes national news tonight. Dateline NBC features her brutal death and the prime suspect, Stephen Avery. In a jailhouse interview yesterday, Avery told a reporter, quote, "They got me looking like an animal." In an interview with the Associated Press, Avery once again accused authorities of planting evidence and coercing a confession from his nephew, Brendan Dassey. The pair are accused of raping, murdering, and then burning the body of Teresa Halbach last fall. Avery asks, why would he have done it?
All of this don't make no sense. I have it made. You know, I was going to work almost every day. I was getting that $425,000 from the state. My lawsuit was almost done. You know, everything was falling in place.
Dateline NBC tonight, the Halbach murder and Stephen Avery's story. Here's a preview of that story with NBC's Victoria Cordery.
A cool wind swept through the woods and fields of rural northeastern Wisconsin last November as volunteers searched for 25-year-old Teresa Halbach. She had vanished a few days before.
We just want her to come home.
20 years earlier, near the same area, another woman, Penny Burnson, almost died when a stranger attacked her while she was jogging.
He ran out from behind the bush, and I knew immediately what he wanted.
Penny says the man demanded sex, and when she fought back, he began to choke her.
I lost consciousness.
Did you have a clear picture of the assailant's face in your head?
Yes, I selected Stephen Avery's photo.
Stephen Avery was charged with attempted murder, false imprisonment, and sexual assault. He had alibi witnesses who placed him far from the crime scene, but he was convicted and sentenced to 32 years in prison, largely on the strength of Penny's identification and unwavering testimony. Still, Avery never admitted guilt, and years later, the Wisconsin Innocence Project took up his case.
I said to my pastor, what if I've made a horrible mistake?
DNA would provide the answer. In this case, and also in the search for Teresa Halbach, was there a connection between them? Victoria Cordery, Dateline NBC.
All right, and again, that Dateline NBC special tonight, 7 o'clock, right here on today's TMJ4.
Murder suspect Stephen Avery has granted another jailhouse interview.
But this time, instead of just denying his involvement in the murder of Teresa Halbach, he's talking about his nephew. Avery says investigators coerced his nephew, Brendan Dassey, into saying the two raped, murdered, and burned Teresa Halbach. Avery says his nephew is not very smart and plays Game Boy all day.
I don't know, where's the justice? You know, I thought you're supposed to be innocent and proven guilty. You know? But here, they got me guilty all the way. And now I got to prove my innocence, just like last time. And it took over 18 years.
And Avery's referring to his wrongful conviction on a rape charge in the mid-'80s. His conviction was overturned with DNA evidence.
The Halbach murder case is the subject of a Dateline NBC special tonight. Victoria Cordery has this preview.
A cool
and speculation that may somehow be connected to the disappearance. That's at 10. New at 9, the Manitowoc County man accused of raping and killing Teresa Halbach is speaking out now from his jail cell.
Stephen Avery spoke with an Associated Press reporter from the Calumet County Jail. Fox 6's Chris Goodman is in the newsroom with more on what he had to say. Chris?
Bev and Brad, Stephen Avery says he's being framed and says he had nothing to do with the death of Teresa Halbach. He says somebody knows something, and for whatever reason they aren't talking. He says he just wants the truth to come out. The remains of 25-year-old photographer Teresa Halbach were found all over the property, the Avery family salvage yard, in November. She disappeared after going there last Halloween to take pictures of a car Avery was selling. Now, a few weeks ago, the kid there, Avery's 16-year-old nephew, confessed that he and Avery raped Halbach, killed her, and then burned up her body. Avery says his nephew was coerced and that it was probably easy to do because, in Avery's words, his nephew is not very smart. Here's some of what Avery had to say during the interview.
But, you know, he's 16 years old, you know. And with the detectives, it don't take much for a young person to, you know, coerce him to say that stuff. Well, you figure he can't even cut a deer up. He can't even do none of that. You know, they got me looking like an animal, and they think that I'm going to run, which I would never do that anyway. Innocent people don't run.
Avery says his mom and his fiancée visit him at least once a week in jail, and he says he is optimistic that he will be found innocent. I did find one discrepancy in something Avery said in this interview and when I interviewed him back in 2004. I'll tell you more about that new on Fox 6 News at 10. Live in the newsroom, Chris Goodman, Fox 6 News.
Okay, Chris, we'll look for that coming up at 10 o'clock. Also tonight, Teresa Halbach's brother, Mike Halbach, says he really isn't surprised by Avery's comments. He says Avery has always been trying to put the blame on others. He adds, and I'm quoting here, "Whenever Avery talks, I think the general public understands what he is saying isn't true."
New information tonight about the beating death of a student outside Malcolm X Academy in Milwaukee. Police have arrested 2 people in connection with the murder of Raheem Patrick. The 15-year-old was killed when a group of boys jumped him at a bus stop outside his school last Thursday. Police tell us the Manitowoc County man accused of raping and killing Teresa Halbach speaks out from jail. A reporter from the Associated Press interviewed Stephen Avery this afternoon over the telephone. Fox 6's Chris Goodman has that story.
Stephen Avery says all the evidence pointing to him as a rapist and murderer was planted, like the key to Teresa Halbach's car investigators say they found in his bedroom.
They searched that place quite a few times. And then Manitowoc County cop found the key laying out there in the open. You know, and they said it was covered up. Then they got on the stand, it was out in the open. You know, because they were putting it there.
Avery also says investigators coerced his 16-year-old nephew into confessing. Brendan Dassey recently admitted that he and Avery raped and killed Teresa Halbach and then burned up her body.
But, you know, he's 16 years old, you know. And with the detectives, it don't take much for a young person to, you know, coerce him to say that stuff. Well, you figure he can't even cut a deer up. He can't even do none of that.
After the confession, Avery's sister, Dassey's mom, gave Avery a message during a television interview.
Stephen, I know you're going to be watching this, but you know, I hate you for what you did to my kid. All right? So you can rot in hell. And I'm going to get you for it.
When she said all of that, she never talked to Brendan. After she talked to Brendan, well, then now she believes different.
Avery says his fiancée Jody and his mom come to visit him at least weekly in the Calumet County Jail.
You know, I got a fiancée. I don't want another woman. I ain't one to cheat on my girlfriends. And that's the only one I've been out with since I've been out, is with Jody.
Avery says he's no rapist and no killer.
Taking a human life, I don't think I could do everything not like that and sleep at night. You know, to shoot a deer or something. You know, but a human, I don't see it.
Now, I interviewed Avery in 2004, 1 year after he was released from prison for a rape he didn't commit. He told me then he still has a lot of hate in him after spending 18 years behind bars. But tonight, he told the Associated Press reporter all the hate disappeared when he got out. He says he is optimistic he's going to be found innocent of all charges relating to Teresa Halbach's death. In the newsroom, Chris Goodman, Fox 6 News.
Chris, thank you. He's accused of raping and murdering a 25-year-old Calumet County photographer. Then investigators say he burned up Teresa Halbach's body.
For the first time since his arrest, Stephen Avery speaks out from his jail cell. He spoke to an Associated Press reporter over the phone yesterday afternoon. Now, we heard some of what Avery had to say last night, but there's more, a lot more. And we warn you, some may find this story very disturbing.
I don't see why I should have to sit in this jail for something I didn't do. Why should I get screwed all the time? It's my second time.
Stephen Avery referring to spending 18 years in prison for a rape he didn't commit. DNA evidence freed him in 2003. Now he says it's happening all over again.
I thought you're supposed to be innocent and proven guilty. But here they got me guilty all the way. And now I got to prove my innocence, just like last time. And it took over 18 years.
But this time, it's DNA evidence that has the cards stacked against him. Teresa Halbach's blood found in his trailer. The key to her car found in his bedroom. But throughout the nearly hour-long interview, Avery maintains he's being framed.
who's ever doing this to me knows what's going on. You know, they're planning it. Who's planning it? I don't know.
The most damning evidence against him, his own 16-year-old nephew confessed recently that he and Avery raped Teresa Halbach. Brendan Dassey says when he went into Avery's trailer on Halloween, he found Halbach shackled to his uncle's bed. Avery admits he kept shackles around, but to spice things up for he and his fiancée.
I forgot to do something different because my sister bought a pair to him. 1, 2, 3, you can get out of them. All you gotta do is press a button back, and you get out of them real easy. It's like a toy.
Dassey told investigators he and Avery murdered Halbach while she was still shackled to the bed. Then the two burned up her body. Avery says investigators coerced his nephew into saying that stuff.
All of this don't make no sense. I had it made. You know, I was going to work almost every day. I was getting that $425,000 from the state. My lawsuit was almost done. You know, everything was falling in place. Then it all broke loose. You know, they got me looking like an animal, and they think that I'm going to run, which I would never do that anyway. Innocent people don't run. All I want to do is marry my fiancée and be on with my life and have a good one. That's all I want, and I can't even get that.
Now, Avery recently hired 2 lawyers with the settlement money he got from the state for his wrongful imprisonment. He says they do know what they're doing, and he is optimistic he will be found innocent once this case goes to trial.
New at 9, it may be 4. Is Stephen Avery trying to send a threatening message to his nephew? That's what attorneys for Brandon Dassey say tonight. On Friday, Avery told the Associated Press that Dassey's statement to investigators on the murder of Teresa Halbach was false. He also said, quote, "The boy isn't very smart." Dassey's attorney says Avery's comment might be his way of trying to intimidate Dassey, and that the words "not very smart" could refer to possible consequences if Dassey were to testify against Avery. Dassey and Avery are accused of raping and killing photographer Teresa Halbach last Halloween. Police in Seattle released the chilling 911 tapes from a mass.
Good evening, I'm Tammy Elliott. I'm Kathy Michael. The accused murderer, Stephen Avery, is talking again, this time saying his nephew was coerced into a confession by detectives.
Police say Avery's teenage nephew implicated Avery in the gruesome murder of a Wisconsin woman. 12 News' Terry Sater joins us with more on this jail cell interview.
Well, our reporters have interviewed Avery on camera before, but tonight we're hearing from the murder suspect for the first time since Avery's nephew was also charged in the killing of Teresa Halbach. Avery spoke from the Calumet County Jail with an Associated Press reporter for more than an hour.
You know, they got me looking like an animal.
That's part of what accused killer Stephen Avery said Friday during a telephone interview from his jail cell.
I didn't do it, so I should be found not guilty.
Avery is accused of raping, killing, and mutilating photographer Teresa Halbach, along with his 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey. Detectives say the nephew confessed and implicated Avery.
But, you know, he's 16 years old, you know. And with the detectives, it don't take much for a young person to, you know, coerce him to say that stuff. Well, you figure he can't even cut a deer up.
Can't even cut up a deer. But police say Dassey implicated Avery in a murder that involved handcuffs and a knife, both used.
I know what the cops are noticed for. You know, because you see it all the time on these programs. So how can I blame him?
Does he think his nephew killed Halbach?
That's hard to believe, too, because I've seen her go out the driveway.
Calumet County Sheriff Jerry Pagel is responding to Avery's claims tonight that his nephew was coerced by investigators. The sheriff says his investigators videotaped Brendan Dassey's entire interview and confession following state law and proper procedure. Tammy?
And how about Teresa Halbach's family? They responded to what Avery is saying today.
Well, they did tonight. Halbach's brother Mike says that Avery has always been trying to put the blame on others, and he thinks the general public understands what Avery's saying is not true.
All right, Terry. Thanks. Shocking new details tonight in the case of a pregnant woman.
The Wisconsin man accused of killing Teresa Halbach is now speaking out about his nephew's confession into the killing and the sexual assault. In a jailhouse interview with the Associated Press, Stephen Avery says his nephew Brendan Dassey, who confessed to his involvement in Teresa Halbach's murder, was coerced by police. Avery says police forced his 16-year-old nephew into telling him that the two raped, murdered, then burned Teresa Halbach's body last Halloween at their auto salvage lot in northern Wisconsin. Now, both Avery and Brendan Dassey, they do face multiple charges.
628-3804. Portia?
And DeMarco, he was accused of raping, killing, and mutilating photographer Teresa Halbach. In a jailhouse interview with the Associated Press, Stephen Avery, he speaks for the first time since his nephew, Brendan Dassey, was also charged in her gruesome murder.
I didn't do it, so I should be found not guilty.
Now, Avery is accused of murdering this Wisconsin photographer, Teresa Halbach, along with his 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey, and detectives say that his nephew did confess, implicating Stephen Avery. And Avery says that his nephew was coerced into his confession.
But, you know, he's 16 years old, you know. And with the detectives, it don't take much for a young person to, you know, coerce them to say that stuff.
Well, the Calumet County Sheriff, Jerry Pagel, he says that investigators videotaped Dassey's entire interview and the confession following state law and proper procedure. DeMarco?
All right. For Jude's injuries.
The Wisconsin man accused of killing photographer Teresa Halbach last Halloween is now speaking out about his nephew's confession after his alleged involvement in that sexual assault. In a jailhouse interview with the Associated Press, Stephen Avery says his nephew, Brendan Dassey, was coerced by police into confessing. Avery says that police forced his 16-year-old into telling them that the two of them raped, murdered, and then burned Teresa Halbach last Halloween at their auto salvage lot in northern Wisconsin. Both Avery and Brendan Dassey, they face multiple charges. Well, Thank you. In other news, the Manitowoc County man accused of murdering a photographer says his co-defendant, his nephew, made the whole story up. Stephen Avery and his 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey, they are charged in the death of Teresa Halbach. Police say Dassey gave them a full confession full of gruesome details, but in a jailhouse interview with the Associated Press, Avery says the confession was forced out of his nephew.
But, you know, he's 16 years old, you know. And with the detectives, it don't take much for a young person to, you know, coerce them to say that stuff.
Investigators say they denied that they coerced Brendan Dassey's confession. Teresa Halbach's family says Avery has a history of trying to blame other people.
A teenager is...
Ashley, thanks a lot. For the first time since his nephew confessed to helping him rape and murder Teresa Halbach, we're hearing from Stephen Avery himself. And according to Avery, his nephew's confession was coerced by cops. 10 on 10's Jay Miller has the story.
It was a bombshell confession, a first-hand account of how he helped his uncle rape, kill, and burn 25-year-old Teresa Halbach last October. But for the first time, Stephen Avery is giving his own account of how his nephew was coerced into a false confession.
He's 16 years old, you know. And with the detectives, it don't take much for a young person to, you know, coerce them to say that stuff.
Despite finding Halbach's DNA and car key on his property, Avery claims authorities have no evidence pinning him to the murder and therefore have conspired to frame him.
Well, everybody out there knows that I am innocent, you know, and they didn't want that. So they had to figure something out how they can turn everybody against me.
And that's when, according to Avery, investigators began pressuring his nephew for answers.
When you coerce somebody, of course, he's going to say something.
Avery claims his nephew isn't very bright, but is incapable of helping anyone commit such a crime.
He can't even cut a deer up.
Avery is facing multiple charges, including first-degree intentional homicide and first-degree sexual assault. He says he's innocent despite his nephew's false claims.
Taking a human life, I don't think I could do everything not like that and sleep at night. I don't think there's no way. You know, animals different, you know, to shoot a deer or something. You know, but a human, I don't see it.
In Calumet County, Jay Miller, 10 at 10.
Now, Avery was released in 2003 after spending 18 years in prison for a rape he didn't commit. If convicted in Halbach's rape and murder, Avery could face life in prison.
A 66-year-old